On an ordinary evening at a neighborhood auto service center outside Atlanta, Darius Coleman only wanted one thing: to fix his aging truck and make it home in time to keep a promise to his 10-year-old daughter. Instead, he found himself publicly humiliated by a manager who judged him by his worn work boots, old pickup, and faded jacket. But Darius refused to trade his dignity for anger. What looked like the defeat of a struggling father quietly became the beginning of a much bigger reckoning, one that would force frightened employees to find their courage, reveal the true measure of a man's character, and remind everyone watching that respect should never depend on a person's appearance, paycheck, or title. The fluorescent lights inside Ridgeway Auto Care hummed with the cold, steady buzz that made every stain on the concrete floor seem a little harsher. Motor oil shimmered in dark patches beneath lifted trucks. Air compressors hissed somewhere in the back. Customers waiting for late evening repairs looked up one by one as a sharp, metallic clatter echoed across the service bay. A ring of keys skidded across the concrete. One key bounced twice before stopping beside a streak of black grease. A small wooden star, hanging from the ring by a worn leather cord, snapped loose and spun away until it rested inches from a heavy work boot. Curtis Hale lowered his hand slowly, as though dropping another man's keys onto the floor were the most ordinary thing in the world. "Go ahead," he said, pointing at the concrete. "Pick them up." The room fell strangely quiet. A television mounted in the corner kept playing a baseball game with the volume turned low, but no one seemed to hear it anymore. A mechanic paused with a tire balanced against his hip. A young mother waiting near the coffee station instinctively pulled her little boy closer. Even the printer behind the service desk stopped rattling for a moment. Darius Coleman didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the small wooden star instead of the keys. For a long second, nobody moved. Curtis folded his arms, a faint smile tugging at one corner of his mouth, convinced he had already won whatever contest this had become. "Didn't hear me?" he asked loudly enough for everyone nearby to listen. "I said pick them up." Darius finally stepped forward. Several customers shifted, expecting him to kneel. Instead, he bent only far enough to reach the wooden star. His fingers brushed away a thin layer of dust before he slipped it carefully into his jacket pocket. The keys remained where they had fallen. Curtis let out a short laugh. "So that's your choice." Darius looked at him calmly, his face giving away almost nothing. There was no anger in his voice, no pleading, no attempt to argue. He simply took out his phone. His thumb moved across the screen. One short message. Nothing more. He slid the phone back into his pocket, walked toward an empty plastic chair against the wall, pulled it away from the vending machines, and quietly sat down. The silence that followed felt heavier than shouting. Curtis shook his head as if watching someone make one foolish decision after another. "You planning to camp here all night?" Darius rested his hands on his knees. "I'm waiting." "For what?" "You'll see." A few people exchanged uncertain glances. Emily Carter, the young receptionist behind the counter, stared down at her keyboard, pretending to organize paperwork she had already arranged twice. The expression on her face suggested she wanted to say something, but years of practice had taught her when silence felt safer. Curtis noticed none of it. He turned toward the customers with the confidence of someone who believed every pair of eyes in the building had just confirmed his authority. "If anybody is wondering," he announced, "this is exactly why we have rules." No one answered. Outside, dusk settled over the parking lot. Last streaks of orange disappeared behind rows of power lines, leaving the service center wrapped in the pale glow of overhead security lights. Minutes passed. The baseball game continued. Coffee steamed inside forgotten paper cups. A wrench clanged somewhere deep inside the garage. Darius never looked toward the keys still lying on the stained concrete. He only rested one hand briefly against the pocket where the wooden star now sat safely hidden. Then, headlights swept across the front windows. Bright white beams rolled through the waiting room before stopping just outside the entrance. An unfamiliar, white service truck pulled sharply into the parking lot. Its engine cut off. The driver's door opened. Every face in Ridgeway Auto Care turned toward the entrance at the exact same moment. Even Curtis stopped talking. For the first time that evening, uncertainty crossed his face. Whoever had just arrived, Darius had been expecting them. Then the story turned back to where the day had truly begun. The alarm on Darius Coleman's old phone buzzed at 5:15 a.m., long before the first hint of daylight reached the duplex neighborhood in Decatur. The house was small. The paint around the kitchen window had started to peel, and every floorboard seemed to remember where to creak. It wasn't much, but it was home. He moved quietly, careful not to wake his 10-year-old daughter before breakfast was ready. Coffee brewed while eggs sizzled in a worn skillet. A lunchbox waited beside two neatly packed containers, one for school and one for the road. Darius glanced at the calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. Every square seemed full. Hospital service calls, mileage notes, payment reminders, and one date circled in blue marker. Lila's science presentation. Tomorrow. He stared at that circle for a second longer than he meant to. Footsteps padded across the hallway. "Dad?" Her sleepy voice carried the warmth that somehow made every exhausting morning worth facing. "I'm in here." Lila appeared wearing oversized socks and carrying her backpack almost as big as she was. Her curly hair still leaned sideways from sleep. "It smells good." "It better." Darius smiled. "Chef's reputation is on the line." She giggled and climbed onto her chair. Breakfast wasn't fancy. Eggs, toast, and sliced apples. Still, they treated mornings like something important. No television, no phones, just conversation. Lila talked excitedly about the model of the human circulatory system she had spent nearly 2 weeks building out of painted tubing, cardboard, and glue. "I think Mrs. Sanders is going to pick 3 projects for the district showcase. I think yours has a pretty good shot." "You always say that." "Because I always believe it." She smiled before taking another bite. After breakfast, Darius reached for his truck keys resting inside a chipped ceramic bowl near the door. Before he could pick them up, Lila gently stopped him. "Wait." She disappeared into her room and came back holding a small wooden star, no larger than a silver dollar. The edges weren't perfectly smooth. One point had been sanded shorter than the others. The two of them had carved it together the previous summer, using leftover wood from an old shelf. Lila threaded the leather cord through the keyring with practiced fingers. "There." Darius turned the little star over in his hand. "It was already on there yesterday." "I know," she said, "but I wanted to make sure it stayed tight." She looked at him with the kind of seriousness only children could wear so naturally. "When you see it." "I remember to come home." She nodded. "No matter how busy." "No matter how busy." He slipped the keys into his pocket. Lila wrapped both arms around him before grabbing her backpack. And don't forget. What now? My presentation. I wouldn't miss it. You promise? Darius met her eyes. I promise. The word came out easily. Keeping it would be much harder. Outside, his aging Ford pickup waited beneath a fading street lamp. The truck had carried him to hundreds of hospitals across Georgia, and lately, every unfamiliar rattle sounded more expensive than the last. As he started the engine, a faint, metallic vibration echoed beneath the dashboard before fading away. Darius frowned. Not today. Please. Not today. He couldn't afford a breakdown. He couldn't afford to miss work. And more than anything else, he couldn't afford to let Leela down. The truck rolled slowly out of the driveway as the wooden star hanging from the keys tapped softly against the steering column with every bump in the road, quietly reminding him of the promise he had just made. Morning traffic thickened as he merged onto Interstate 20, headlights stretching across the grey dawn like an endless ribbon. Atlanta was just beginning to wake. Delivery trucks rumbled toward warehouses. School buses appeared at neighborhood corners. Radio stations drifted between weather reports and country music before Darius finally switched the radio off. Silence helped him think. His first stop was Pine Ridge Community Hospital, a small facility tucked into a rural county nearly an hour outside the city. Hospitals like this rarely made the news. They weren't famous research centers or towering medical campuses. They simply cared for whoever came through the doors, no matter how busy or underfunded they were. People depended on machines that almost nobody noticed until they stopped working. And those machines depended on people like Darius. By 8 o'clock, he was already kneeling beside an aging ventilator inside a cramped equipment room. His tool bag lay open on the floor beside dozens of neatly organized instruments, each one cleaned until it almost looked new despite years of use. Monitors beeped steadily from nearby patient rooms. Nurses hurried through the hallway carrying medication trays. Darius removed a side panel from the ventilator and frowned. There you are, he whispered. A pressure regulator had begun wearing unevenly. It hadn't failed yet, but it would. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next week. But eventually it would. A younger technician might have logged the inspection, ordered the replacement and driven away. Instead, Darius rolled up his sleeves. He searched through the hospital's spare parts cabinet before carefully rebuilding the regulator himself. It took almost 90 extra minutes. No one had asked him to stay. No contract required it. When he finally tightened the last screw, the ventilator restarted with a smooth, steady rhythm. A nurse standing nearby released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I thought we'd lose this one, she admitted. So did I. Monica Reyes stepped into the room carrying 2 paper coffee cups and a wrapped turkey sandwich. She had worked emergency care long enough to recognize exhaustion when she saw it. You skipped breakfast again, didn't you? Darius smiled. I had breakfast. A real one. Depends how generous you're feeling. She handed him the sandwich anyway. No charge. I can't keep taking food from you. You've refused every thank you gift this hospital's tried to give you. I was doing my job. You stayed almost 2 hours longer than your job required. He shrugged. The machine didn't care what the paperwork said. Monica laughed softly. That's the most Darius answer I've ever heard. They walked together into the hallway, where sunlight spilled through tall windows onto polished floors. You know, Monica said carefully, Calvin Brooks was asking about you again last week. Darius paused. I figured. He still tells people about that winter storm. I wish he'd stop. You kept 3 emergency departments running when every contractor said it couldn't be done. I fixed equipment. You saved lives. He looked away. I fixed equipment. Monica studied him for a moment. There's an opening at Regionals Medical. Better pay, better hours, company, vehicle. Benefits that actually make sense. Darius folded the sandwich into his tool bag. I appreciate it, but my hospitals need me. You can't carry every small hospital in Georgia by yourself. No. He smiled gently. But I can carry today's. Monica shook her head with affectionate disbelief. One of these days you're going to let somebody help you. Maybe. She knew that answer meant no. As Darius headed toward the parking lot, she called after him. At least call Calvin sometime. He lifted one hand without turning around. We'll see. Outside, warm afternoon air had replaced the cool morning breeze. He climbed into the Ford and started the engine. For several seconds, everything sounded normal. Then, a harsh, metallic vibration rattled beneath the truck. Stronger this time. Longer. His smile disappeared. He rested one hand on the steering wheel while the wooden star swung gently beneath the ignition. Tomorrow morning. Lila's presentation. He silently calculated the miles still left to drive, the hospitals still waiting for him, and the money sitting in his checking account. None of those numbers gave him much comfort. He eased the truck into gear and hoped the strange sound would survive just one more day. It didn't know that before the sun went down, it would carry him straight into Ridgeway Auto Care. By late afternoon, the Georgia heat had settled over the highways like a heavy blanket. Darius had finished 2 more service calls, signed 3 maintenance reports, and answered 4 phone calls from hospitals asking if he could squeeze in another visit before the end of the week. He hated saying no. Every machine he repaired represented a patient who might never know his name, and somehow that made the responsibility feel even greater. As he pulled away from his final stop, the truck shuddered again. This time, the vibration climbed through the steering wheel and into his hands. "Come on," he murmured, patting the dashboard as if the old Ford could hear him. "Just get us home." The wooden star hanging from his keys tapped softly against the steering column. Tap, tap, tap. Almost like a tiny heartbeat. His phone buzzed through the truck speakers. Lila calling. He smiled before answering. "Hey, Peanut. Dad. Guess what? You built a rocket?" She laughed. "No. Mrs. Sanders let me practice first. And I didn't even get nervous. I knew you wouldn't." She paused for a second. "You'll still be there tomorrow, right?" Darius tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I promised." "I know." Another pause. "The star's still on your keys?" He glanced down. "It sure is. So you won't forget your way home?" "I never could." She seemed satisfied. "I love you, Dad. I love you more." "That's impossible. We'll debate that over pancakes tomorrow." She giggled. "It's a deal." The call ended, leaving the cab quiet again, except for the hum of tires rolling across pavement. 10 miles later, the metallic noise returned. Louder. The truck jerked once before settling again. Darius eased onto the shoulder, climbed out, and crouched beside the front wheel. Nothing obvious. No leaking fluid. No hanging exhaust pipe. No smoke. He slid underneath just far enough to shine a flashlight toward the undercarriage. Something metallic vibrated for a moment before falling silent again. Not catastrophic. Not yet. but enough to make another 100-mile workday a gamble. He checked the time. 6:07 p.m. Every independent mechanic he trusted had already closed. His eyes drifted toward a large illuminated sign less than half a mile ahead. Ridgeway Auto Care open until 7 p.m. He hesitated. Corporate repair chains were usually more expensive than neighborhood garages. Still, missing tomorrow's service route would cost far more. And missing Leela's presentation wasn't an option. He climbed back into the truck. 5 minutes later, he turned into the wide parking lot. The building looked almost too polished. Bright glass windows reflected the evening sky. Freshly painted service bays stretched along one side. Inside, technicians finished the last jobs of the day, while customers waited beneath bright lights and spotless tile floors. Compared to the small repair shops Darius usually visited, Ridgeway looked almost like a dealership. He parked near the edge of the lot. For several seconds, he remained behind the wheel. He glanced at the balance in his checking account on his phone. Enough for groceries, enough for rent, maybe enough for a repair, depending on what they found. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. The wooden star brushed against his hand as he grabbed the keys. "One problem at a time," he whispered. Inside, cool air replaced the lingering summer heat. The waiting area smelled faintly of fresh coffee and new tires. Behind the front counter, a young receptionist looked up immediately. She smiled. Not the practiced smile printed into customer service manuals, but the genuine kind that reached her eyes. "Good evening," she said warmly. "Welcome to Ridgeway Auto Care. I'm Emily. What can we help you with today?" Darius returned the smile. "My truck started making a noise I'd rather not ignore. We'll see what we can do." She reached for a clipboard. For one brief moment, it felt as though the evening might end exactly the way he'd hoped. Then a polished pair of dress shoes appeared from the office hallway. The man wearing them slowed as his eyes traveled from Darius's dusty work boots to his faded work jacket to the 15-year-old Ford parked outside the front window. Before he spoke a single word, he had already decided exactly what kind of customer was standing at his counter. Curtis Hale walked with the confidence of someone who believed every inch of Ridgeway Auto Care belonged to him. His pressed blue shirt didn't carry a wrinkle. His name badge caught the overhead lights as he approached the counter, his eyes never meeting Darius's face until they had finished inspecting everything else first. The worn work boots, the faded jacket with a hospital maintenance logo stitched over one pocket, the calloused hands, and through the front window, the aging Ford pickup sitting alone beneath the parking lot lights. Emily looked up with the clipboard still in her hands. "Mr. Coleman says he's hearing a metal vibration underneath the truck. I was just opening a repair order." Curtis reached over and took the clipboard before she could finish. "What year?" 2009, Darius answered. Curtis gave a slow nod. "Figures." He glanced back toward the truck. "How many miles?" "Just over 200,000. Another nod. "Well, sometimes vehicles simply reach the end of the road." His tone sounded almost pleasant. Almost. Darius kept his voice even. It was inspected 3 months ago. The sound just started today. Curtis barely acknowledged the explanation. "We're pretty busy." Darius looked around the waiting area. 2 customers remained. One technician was already lowering a vehicle from a lift. Another bay sat empty. "I don't mind waiting." Curtis smiled politely without warmth. "You might have to." Emily quietly spoke up. We still have Bay 4 available. Curtis turned toward her. I know what we have. She immediately lowered her eyes. Darius noticed it. Not fear exactly. Habit. The kind that came from being corrected often enough that speaking became something you measured carefully. Curtis finally slid the clipboard back across the counter. Diagnostics start at $149. That's fine. Non-refundable. I understand. And if we find multiple issues, labor isn't included. I understand. Curtis studied him another moment, almost disappointed that none of the warnings had produced the reaction he expected. Payment up front. Darius reached into his wallet and handed over his debit card. Curtis accepted it between two fingers. For just a fraction of a second, his eyes lingered on the worn leather wallet before handing the card to Emily. She processed the payment. Approved. Receipt printed. Everything perfectly normal. Yet Curtis still seemed unconvinced. You sure this card belongs to you? Emily froze. Darius looked directly at him. Yes. Curtis shrugged. Just asking. Emily handed the receipt back with an apologetic smile. I'm sorry about the wait. It's all right. No, she said quietly. It shouldn't take long. Curtis interrupted before she could say another word. Evan. A young technician looked up from the service bay. Finish the SUV first. It only needs tires, Evan replied. I can pull the Ford in while the machine's running. Curtis didn't even look at him. I gave you an order. Yes, sir. The young mechanic disappeared back into the garage. Darius glanced once more towards his truck. Every passing minute brought him closer to missing dinner with Leela. He checked his phone. One unread message. A photo. Leela stood beside her science project, grinning proudly with paint still on one cheek. Underneath she'd written, "Can't wait to show everyone tomorrow." Darius smiled despite himself. He slipped the phone away, just as movement outside caught his attention. Near the far edge of the parking lot, an elderly woman struggled beside a silver sedan. Its trunk stood open. A spare tire leaned awkwardly against the bumper while she wrestled with a lug wrench that refused to move. She looked around. Several customers noticed. Nobody moved. Inside, the waiting room remained comfortably air-conditioned. Outside, the evening heat still shimmered above the asphalt. Darius looked back toward the service counter. My truck hasn't gone in yet. Curtis answered without looking up from his computer. No. I'll be right back. Before Curtis could respond, Darius pushed through the glass doors and crossed the parking lot toward the stranded woman. Emily watched him leave. Curtis glanced through the window, following Darius with narrowed eyes. Instead of seeing a customer helping someone in need, he saw a man walking away from the counter. And somehow, in Curtis Hale's mind, that made him even more suspicious. The evening sun still held enough warmth to radiate off the asphalt as Darius crossed the parking lot. The elderly woman had managed to loosen one lug nut, but the wrench kept slipping from her hands. You all right, Mom? Darius asked. She looked up, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. I've changed tires before, she said with an embarrassed smile. Just not lately. Darius smiled back. May I? She stepped aside with visible relief. My name's Ruth Bennett. Darius Coleman. He set the jack more securely beneath the frame and tested it before lifting the car another few inches. Safety first, he said. You never trust the first position. Ruth chuckled. My husband used to say exactly that. Darius worked with calm, practiced movements. Years spent maintaining life support equipment had taught him that rushing usually created bigger problems than the one in front of him. Within minutes, the damaged tire came off. The spares went on. He tightened each lug nut in a crisscross pattern before lowering the car. "There," he said, giving the wheel one final check. "You should still have a shop inspect the full tire tomorrow. This spare isn't meant for long trips." Ruth reached into her purse. "Please let me pay you." He shook his head. "No, Mom. You just saved me at least an hour." "I just saved somebody's evening." She looked at him carefully. "There aren't many people who stop anymore. My daughter would expect me to." That answer made Ruth smile. Then she must have a wonderful father. For just a moment, Darius thought about Lila waiting at home, probably finishing the last touches on her science display. "I've got a wonderful daughter," he replied softly. Inside Ridgeway, Emily had watched almost the entire exchange through the front windows. "So he really went out there just to help her," she murmured. Evan glanced up from the garage. "Looks like it." Curtis folded his arms. "Or he wanted everyone watching." Emily frowned. "I don't think so." Curtis didn't answer. His attention stayed fixed on Darius as he accepted nothing more than a grateful handshake before walking back toward the building. When Darius stepped inside again, he wiped a little dust from his hands. "Sorry about that." Emily smiled. "No apology needed." Curtis spoke before she could continue. "Interesting timing." Darius looked at him. "Excuse me. You left the lobby while your vehicle was waiting. Someone needed help." Curtis leaned against the counter. "Or maybe you wanted access to the parking lot." Darius blinked once, unsure he'd heard correctly. "The parking lot?" Curtis nodded toward the rows of customer vehicles. "We've had thefts before." Emily looked up immediately. "Not since I've worked here." Curtis ignored her. "You understand why we stay alert. I changed a flat tire. You were walking around customers' cars. I walked to one customer's car. The point still stands." For the first time that evening, a few people in the waiting room openly stared. Darius could feel the conversation shifting away from facts and toward assumptions. He chose his next words carefully. "I appreciate people protecting their customers." Curtis gave a satisfied nod. "But accusing someone without a reason doesn't protect anyone." The smile disappeared from Curtis's face. Before either man could speak again, Evan walked in carrying a tablet. "Mr. Hale, Bay 4's open now." Curtis looked at the screen, then back at Darius. "We'll get to him." Evan hesitated. "I mean, it's open now." "I heard you." Evan quietly returned to the garage. Emily watched him leave, then lowered her voice. "The truck really could go in now." Curtis slid a repair estimate across the counter instead. "I decided we need an advanced diagnostic package." Darius looked down. The total had nearly doubled. He slowly read every line. "Electronic systems analysis. Premium drivetrain inspection. Extended vibration mapping. Services no one had mentioned 20 minutes earlier." He lifted his eyes. "My truck hasn't even been inside yet." Kurtz answered without the slightest hesitation. "That's our recommendation. And it's based on my experience." Darius rested one hand on the counter. His voice remained calm. "I'd rather pay for work that's actually being performed." For the first time all evening, Emily looked directly at Darius instead of the floor. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something. Then she noticed Curtis watching her. She fell silent. But the look in her eyes said what her voice couldn't. Something inside Ridgeway Auto Care had been wrong long before Darius Coleman ever walked through its front door. Curtis tapped the inflated estimate with one finger. "This is the package I'd recommend." Darius read every line again without rushing. Years spent troubleshooting medical equipment had taught him that paperwork often revealed more than people intended. He looked up. "Can I ask one question?" Curtis shrugged. "Go ahead." "Which technician inspected my truck?" "The service department." "Which technician?" Curtis's jaw tightened. "They all know what they're doing." "That's not what I asked." For a brief moment, nobody behind the counter spoke. Darius glanced through the glass wall separating the waiting room from the service bays. His old Ford still sat exactly where he'd parked it. The hood hadn't been opened. No lift was occupied by his truck. No diagnostic cable hung from its dashboard. He pointed toward the parking lot. "My truck hasn't moved." Curtis answered immediately. "We performed a visual assessment." "A visual assessment doesn't explain electronic diagnostics." Curtis folded his arms. "Are you questioning our process?" "I'm asking how you diagnosed a vehicle that hasn't entered the shop." Emily's fingers froze above the keyboard. Evan, carrying an air hose toward another bay, slowed just enough to hear the exchange. Curtis reached across the counter, pulled the estimate back, and printed another sheet. "This one's simpler." He slid it toward Darius. The diagnostic package had disappeared. In its place was a new charge. Special inspection fee. Darius frowned. "I've never heard of this." "It's store policy." "Is it?" "It is now." The words hung in the air. Emily finally found the courage to speak. "Mr. Hale." Curtis didn't even turn. "What?" We don't usually charge that." His eyes shifted toward her. "Are you correcting me?" "I'm just saying I know exactly what our policies are." She lowered her head immediately. "I'm sorry." Darius watched the exchange in silence. It wasn't simply embarrassment on Emily's face. It was resignation. The kind that settled in after someone had learned that honesty carried consequences. He pushed the paper back across the counter. "I'll pass." Curtis smiled without warmth. "That's your choice." "I'd just like my keys." "They're still being processed." "My truck hasn't been touched." "We'll decide when it's ready." Darius stared at him for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly. I've spent 20 years maintaining machines that keep people alive." Curtis laughed once. "And?" "I've learned something." "What?" "When someone refuses to answer a simple question." Darius's eyes drifted toward the untouched Ford outside. "It's usually because the truthful answer creates a bigger problem." The waiting room became noticeably quieter. An older couple sitting near the coffee station stopped pretending to read brochures. A delivery driver looked up from his phone. Even the television seemed strangely distant. Just then, Evan walked toward the counter carrying a tablet. "Mr. Hale." "What now?" I don't have a work order for the Ford." Curtis answered without looking. "You will?" "I mean..." Evan hesitated. "I haven't even checked it in yet." The young mechanic's voice wasn't challenging. It was confused. Curtis took the tablet from his hands. "I'll handle the paperwork." Evan nodded slowly, but before turning away, he looked directly at Darius. Something about the man's face tugged at an old memory. The calm voice, the hospital logo stitched onto the faded jacket, the careful way he observed every detail before speaking. "I've seen you somewhere," Evan said almost to himself. Darius offered a polite smile. "It's possible." "No," Evan frowned. "It wasn't here." He searched his memory while Curtis impatiently dismissed him. "Get back to work." Evan walked away, still glancing over his shoulder. The feeling refused to leave him. He knew that face. He just couldn't remember why. Across the counter, Darius remained calm, but inside he realized something important. Curtis wasn't making mistakes. Every new charge, every delayed answer, every interruption, every attempt to silence Emily, they weren't accidents. They were habits. And habits were much harder to fix than a broken truck. Darius rested both hands lightly on the service counter, refusing to let the tension around him dictate his own behavior. The fluorescent lights reflected off the polished countertop, while beyond the glass wall, his old Ford remained untouched, exactly where he had parked it nearly 40 minutes earlier. "I'd like my keys back," he said quietly. Curtis leaned back as though the request amused him. "Not yet. My truck hasn't been inspected. It will be. I'd rather take it somewhere else." Curtis's smile faded. "Once a vehicle is in our service process, we don't just hand over the keys because someone changes his mind." Darius looked through the window again. "It isn't in your service process." Curtis didn't answer. Instead, he reached beneath the counter and picked up Darius's keyring. The wooden star swung gently beneath the metal keys. For an instant, Darius almost reached for it. Almost. Curtis noticed. He casually closed his fist around the keys. "You'll get these when we're finished." Emily couldn't stay quiet any longer. "Mr. Hale." "What now?" "The Ford was never checked into the shop. The work order still isn't active." Curtis slowly turned toward her. "You seem awfully interested in this customer." "I'm interested in doing it correctly." A silence settled over the waiting room. Curtis stepped closer to Emily, lowering his voice just enough that everyone could still hear the edge beneath it. "Would you like fewer hours next week's schedule?" Emily's shoulders stiffened. "No." "Then let management handle management." She swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." Darius watched her look down at the keyboard again. Not because she had been proven wrong, because she had been reminded who controlled her paycheck. Just then, another voice came from the garage. "Mr. Hale." It was Evan. He walked toward the counter, holding a flashlight in one hand. I looked outside. Curtis frowned. "So?" "The heat shield above the exhaust looks loose." Darius glanced toward him. "You checked it?" I crouched underneath while bringing another car in. Curtis interrupted immediately. "Without authorization. I just happened to notice it. It could still be something else." "Of course," Evan replied. "But it would explain the vibration." Darius nodded politely. "Thank you." Curtis shot Evan a sharp look. "We don't diagnose vehicles from a parking lot." "No, sir." "But you just sold me diagnostics from the parking lot," Darius said calmly. No one laughed. The sentence landed too close to the truth. Curtis's jaw tightened. Before he could respond, the front door burst open. A young woman hurried inside, visibly shaken. "My son fell off his bike," she cried. "Can somebody help?" Behind her, a boy no older than 8 sat on the curb outside, holding his left arm against his chest. Several people instinctively looked toward Curtis. He hesitated. "We should probably call—" Darius was already moving. He crossed the waiting room in 3 long strides and reached his truck before anyone else. Opening the passenger side toolbox, he removed a compact first aid kit. The wooden star hanging from his keys caught the evening light for a brief second before disappearing back into his pocket. Outside, the little boy's face had turned pale. "It hurts," he whispered. "I know," Darius said gently as he knelt beside him. "I'm Darius. What's your name?" "Tyler." "All right, Tyler. I'm not going to move your arm more than I have to." His voice remained calm, steady, the kind of voice people trusted during frightening moments. He carefully supported the child's forearm with a folded emergency splint from the kit and secured it with soft bandages. "No pulling," he explained to the boy's mother. "Just enough support until the emergency clinic checks for a fracture." The boy took a slow breath. "It hurts less." "Good," Darius smiled. "That's exactly what we wanted." Behind them, Evan had quietly followed outside. He watched the practiced movements, the confidence, the gentle reassurance. Then something clicked. A winter night. Hospital corridors. Emergency generators humming through a snowstorm. A man working alone beside broken medical equipment while everyone else feared the intensive care unit would lose ventilation. Evan's eyes widened. He knew exactly where he had seen Darius before, and for the first time all evening, he realized Curtis had picked the wrong man to underestimate. Evan stood motionless beside the little boy, watching Darius finish securing the temporary splint with the same steady hands that had once worked through a blizzard, while hospital alarms echoed down frozen hallways. "You'll be okay," Darius told Tyler with a reassuring smile. "Keep your arm still until the doctor takes a look." Tyler nodded bravely. "Thanks, mister." His mother blinked back grateful tears. "I don't even know how to thank you." "You already did," Darius replied. "You trusted me." He packed the first aid kit without ceremony and walked back toward the service entrance, unaware that Evan hadn't taken his eyes off him. As soon as they stepped inside, Evan hurried to catch up. "Mr. Coleman." Darius turned. "I remember now." A faint smile crossed Darius's face. "Do you?" "My mom was at Cedar Valley Medical during the ice storm last winter." He swallowed hard. "The ventilators almost failed." Darius recognized the name immediately. "She recovered?" Evan nodded. "Because somebody refused to leave." He shook his head in disbelief. "That somebody was you." Several customers nearby looked over. Curtis stepped out of his office before Darius could answer. "Enough." Evan looked at him. "I'm just telling him." "I said enough." Curtis's voice carried across the waiting room. "We're running an auto shop, not hosting reunion stories." Evan hesitated. "But it's true." Curtis ignored him. Instead, he reached beneath the counter and picked up Darius's keyring once again. The small wooden star dangled beneath the keys. "You've caused enough distractions tonight." "I helped a child," Darius answered calmly. "You left while your vehicle was under evaluation." "It wasn't." Curtis took one deliberate step forward. "I've decided we need to inspect your personal belongings before releasing anything." Emily looked up so quickly, her chair rolled backward. "What?" Curtis didn't acknowledge her. "We've had tools disappear before. Darius's expression never changed. Are you saying I stole something? I'm saying we need to be certain. Leon Price, the contract security guard, had been standing quietly near the entrance for most of the evening. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with tired eyes that suggested he'd seen more conflict than he ever wanted. Curtis waved him over. "Leon." The guard approached. "Yes, sir." "Stay with Mr. Coleman while we verify nothing's missing." Leon glanced around the shop. No technician appeared concerned. No inventory alarm had sounded. Nothing suggested any theft had occurred. "What exactly is missing?" Leon asked carefully. Curtis answered without hesitation. "We're checking." Leon frowned slightly. "So, nothing has been reported?" Curtis's tone sharpened. "I gave you an instruction." Years of working contract security had taught Leon how easily one complaint could cost him an assignment. He looked at Darius, then back at Curtis. Finally, he sighed. "I'll stay here." Darius met the guard's eyes. "I understand." There was no anger in his voice, only quiet disappointment that somehow made Leon feel worse. Emily couldn't stay silent. "Mr. Hale, this isn't fair." Curtis rounded on her immediately. "You want tomorrow off?" She froze. "No." "Then stop questioning management." Her hands slowly retreated from the keyboard. The waiting room fell silent once more. Only the vending machine hummed in the corner. Darius noticed every face around him. The older couple. The delivery driver. A college student pretending to scroll through his phone. Everyone knew something wasn't right. No one spoke. He had seen this kind of silence before, not in repair shops, but in hospital corridors where exhausted staff watched someone in authority make the wrong decision because challenging it felt too dangerous. Evan broke the silence. I know this man." Curtis laughed. "So? He spent an entire night fixing equipment nobody else could repair. We're talking about a truck. We're talking about character." Curtis stared at him. "I suggest you remember who's signing your time card." The words landed like a door slamming shut. Evan's jaw tightened. He wanted to say more. Instead, he lowered his head and stepped back toward the garage. Darius watched him go. Then he looked at Leon. "You don't actually believe I stole anything?" Leon answered honestly. "No." "Then why are you standing here?" The guard took a long breath. "Because walking away might cost me my job." Darius nodded slowly. "I figured." For a brief moment, neither man spoke. One was trapped by authority, the other by someone else's suspicion. Curtis mistook the silence for surrender. He smiled to himself, convinced he had regained control of the room. He had no idea that every decision he made was building a record far more powerful than any argument Darius could have offered. And before the night was over, that record would speak for itself. Curtis straightened his shirt cuffs as though the matter had already been settled. "Leon," he said, "ask him to empty his pockets." The words hung in the air. Leon didn't move. "Sir," he replied carefully, "we normally do that only if there's a specific report." "There doesn't have to be one." "There usually is." Curtis's patience vanished. "I manage this location." Leon looked at Darius, then around the waiting room. Every pair of eyes seemed fixed on them now. Darius broke the silence first. "If showing what's in my pockets helps everyone understand where this is going, I'll cooperate." Leon blinked. "You don't have to." "I know." Darius's voice remained steady, but I won't give anyone a reason to say I refused. He slowly reached into his jacket. First came a folded shop towel, then a flashlight worn smooth from years of use, a small multi-tool, his wallet, his phone. Everything was placed neatly on the counter. Finally, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. The wooden star brushed against his fingers before he pulled out his keys. Curtis stepped forward before Darius could set them down. "I'll take those." Without waiting for permission, he snatched the keyring from Darius's hand. The wooden star swung wildly beneath the keys. Emily inhaled sharply. "Mr. Hale!" Curtis ignored her. He looked over every item on the counter with exaggerated suspicion, as though expecting stolen merchandise to appear by magic. "There," he muttered. "I don't see anything." Darius remained silent. Curtis opened the wallet. Inside were a driver's license, 2 worn credit cards, a folded receipt from a grocery store, and a school photograph. A little girl smiled brightly into the camera, missing one front tooth. Behind the photo, barely visible, was a strip of blue construction paper with uneven handwriting. Curtis glanced at it without understanding. "You carry arts and crafts now." Darius gently reached forward. "Please don't bend that." Curtis held it another second before letting the wallet fall back onto the counter. "Your daughter?" "Yes." "What is she?" 10. She turned 10 this spring." Curtis shrugged. "She deserves a father with a more reliable vehicle." The room went still. Emily closed her eyes. Leon looked away. Even Evan, standing halfway inside the service bay, stopped walking. Darius said nothing. His hand quietly returned the photograph to its place inside the wallet with surprising care, making sure the blue paper behind it remained perfectly flat. Only then did he answer. "She deserves a father who keeps his promises." Curtis laughed softly. "Hard to keep promises when you're stranded in an old truck." Darius didn't rise to the insult. Instead, he looked past Curtis through the service windows toward his Ford. "I'd still like my keys." Curtis twirled them once around his finger. "You'll get them when I say so." A murmur passed through the waiting room. The older man by the coffee station whispered something to his wife. A delivery driver quietly picked up his phone. Not to record, to make sure the camera was ready if he needed it. Curtis never noticed. He walked toward the service entrance, still holding Darius's keys. The wooden star tapped lightly against the metal ring with every step. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded almost fragile. Then Curtis stopped. He turned back. A slow smile spread across his face. Actually, without warning, he flicked his wrist. The keyring sailed across the polished floor. Metal struck concrete with a sharp crack. The keys scattered in different directions. The wooden star slipped free from its leather loop and slid several feet before coming to rest in a thin streak of oil near the center of the garage. No one spoke. Curtis pointed toward the floor. "Pick them up." No one breathed. The command echoed beneath the fluorescent lights. Darius looked first at the scattered keys, then at the small wooden star lying by itself. He walked forward. Every eye followed him. He bent only far enough to lift the little wooden star from the stained concrete. With the edge of his sleeve, he carefully wiped away the oil before slipping it safely into his jacket pocket. The keys remained exactly where they had fallen. Darius slowly stood to his full height. Then he reached into his pocket, unlocked his phone, and typed a single message. He pressed send. Without another word, he pulled a plastic chair away from the wall, sat down facing the service counter, folded his hands, and waited. Curtis smiled, convinced he had just broken another difficult customer. He had no idea that one short message had already begun bringing the only person Darius trusted to witness what happened next. The waiting room settled into an uneasy silence. No one returned to their conversations. The television still played above the coffee station, but every eye drifted back toward the service counter every few seconds, as if everyone sensed they were waiting for something larger than a disagreement over a repair bill. Darius remained seated. His hands rested loosely on his knees. The wooden star, now tucked safely inside his jacket pocket, pressed lightly against his chest every time he breathed. Curtis glanced at him and smirked. Comfortable? I'll manage. You know, most people would have left by now. I know. So why are you still here? Darius looked toward Emily, then Evan, and finally Leon. Because if I leave now, nothing changes. Curtis laughed. You're giving yourself way too much importance. No. Darius's answer came quietly. I'm giving everyone else a chance. Curtis rolled his eyes. Emily lowered her head again, pretending to answer emails that weren't there. Her hands trembled slightly above the keyboard. Leon shifted his weight near the entrance. He had spent years working security at warehouses, office parks, and shopping centers. He knew the difference between keeping peace and helping someone abuse authority. Tonight, those two things no longer felt the same. You all right? Darius asked him softly. Leon gave a tired smile. I've had easier evenings. I believe you. I should have spoken up sooner. You still can. Leon looked away. It's not always that simple. I know. That answer surprised him. You do. I've worked in places where people stayed quiet because they thought silence protected their families. Leon nodded slowly. And sometimes it does. For a while, the words lingered between them. Across the room, Evan walked back into the garage, but he couldn't concentrate on the truck in front of him. The memory had finally become crystal clear. Snow hammered against hospital windows. Emergency lights flashed through the darkness. His mother had been lying unconscious in intensive care, while nurses whispered that one of the ventilators might fail before another technician could reach the hospital. One man had refused to leave, not because anyone ordered him to stay, because patients couldn't wait. Evan remembered seeing that same calm face illuminated by the glow of an equipment panel. He remembered hearing one exhausted nurse say, "If Darius gives up, we're all out of options." His mother had survived. Until tonight, Evan had never expected to see that man again. He walked toward the office door. Mr. Hale. Curtis barely looked up. What? I think you're making a mistake. Curtis's expression hardened immediately. Excuse me. I know Mr. Coleman. So you've said. He isn't the kind of man you're accusing. Curtis folded his arms. Since when do technicians decide how I run this shop? I'm just telling you what I know. What you know, Curtis replied coldly, is how to replace brake pads. The words landed like a slap. I've worked here 4 years. And you'll keep working here if you remember that. Evan fell silent. Not because Curtis had convinced him, because every employee in the building understood exactly what that sentence meant. Emily stared at her monitor. Leon looked toward the front windows. No one defended Evan aloud. Darius watched the exchange without interrupting. Another small piece of the puzzle settled into place. This wasn't simply a manager with a temper. It was a workplace where fear had become part of the routine. His phone vibrated once. A new voicemail notification. Lila. He slipped in one earbud just long enough to listen. "Hi, Dad. I practiced my presentation again. Mrs. Sanders said I remembered every part. Don't work too late. I want you to see it first thing tomorrow. Love you." The message lasted less than 20 seconds. When it ended, Darius closed his eyes for a brief moment. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket. Emily noticed the faint smile that crossed his face despite everything happening around him. "Your daughter?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "She's the reason I don't lose my temper." Before Emily could reply, headlights swept across the front windows. A white service vehicle turned sharply into the parking lot. Its tires crunched over loose gravel before stopping directly outside the entrance. Curtis glanced toward the door with mild annoyance. "We're closed." But the engine didn't pull away. Instead, the driver's door opened. Someone stepped out carrying a hospital identification badge clipped to a navy jacket. For the first time since throwing the keys onto the floor, Curtis felt a flicker of uncertainty he couldn't explain. The white service vehicle idled for only a moment before its engine shut off. The driver's door swung open. A woman in navy scrubs stepped out first, her hospital ID badge catching the glow from the parking lot lights. She moved quickly, scanning the service center through the glass before spotting Darius sitting against the wall. Monica Reyes. She didn't rush inside. Instead, she waited beside the vehicle, glancing toward the passenger side as another door opened. A tall man in a charcoal jacket climbed out carrying a slim laptop case. Unlike Monica, he wore no suit, no polished shoes, nothing that suggested authority at first glance. His badge simply read, "Calvin Brooks, Regional Clinical Equipment Program." Curtis frowned. "They're here for him?" Emily looked from the parking lot to Darius. "You know them?" Darius simply nodded once. "I asked someone to come." Curtis forced a laugh. "So what is this? You called your co-workers?" "I asked for witnesses." That answer unsettled Curtis more than he wanted to admit. Leon quietly straightened beside the entrance. Outside, Calvin spoke briefly with Monica before both started walking toward the front doors. Their pace wasn't hurried. It was purposeful. Inside the waiting room, several customers instinctively stood. The older couple exchanged uncertain looks. The delivery driver quietly unlocked his phone again, this time opening the camera without raising it. Nobody wanted to interrupt. Everyone wanted to understand. Curtis adjusted his collar. "I'll handle this." Emily didn't answer. She was watching Darius instead. He hadn't moved from the plastic chair. He hadn't tried to collect the keys still scattered across the concrete. He hadn't demanded respect. He had waited. The automatic doors slid open. A rush of warm evening air drifted into the lobby. Monica entered first. The moment she saw Darius, concern crossed her face. "Darius, you made good time. You sounded different on the phone. I wanted you to see something." She followed his gaze. The scattered keys. The streak of oil across the concrete. The empty leather cord hanging from the keyring where the little wooden star had once been. Then she noticed the star tucked safely into Darius's jacket pocket. Her expression hardened. Calvin stepped inside a second later. His eyes traveled across the room with the quiet habit of someone who noticed details before asking questions. the untouched Ford outside, the customers who had stopped talking, Emily standing rigid behind the counter, Leon remaining near Darius instead of near the exit, Curtis blocking the service desk, and finally, the keys lying on the floor. He looked at Darius. "You all right?" "I'm fine. You asked me to come immediately." "I did." Calvin nodded once. Then, without another word, he crouched beside the keys. He didn't pick them up. He simply looked at where they had landed. His eyes paused on the scrape marks across the concrete. Then he stood. "Would someone mind telling me," he asked calmly, "how a customer's keys ended up on the garage floor?" Silence. Curtis answered first. "He became disruptive." Darius said nothing. Calvin turned to Emily. She opened her mouth, then glanced toward Curtis. Fear returned to her face. Leon noticed it too. For the first time all evening, he stepped away from the wall and spoke before anyone else could. "Mr. Brooks." Calvin looked at him. "I think," Leon said carefully, "you should hear what everyone saw, before you hear what anyone claims." Curtis's confidence faltered. Not because anyone had accused him, because one by one, the people who had stayed silent were beginning to find their voices. And maybe that's what Darius Coleman protected most that night. Not his truck, not his reputation, but the small wooden star that reminded him who he promised to be, even when someone else tried to take his dignity away. This story reminds us that a single act of courage can give others permission to be brave too. The moment one person chooses to stand for what's right, silence begins to lose its power. Today, think about one moment when you've stayed quiet because speaking up felt uncomfortable. The next time you see someone being treated unfairly, remember what Darius chose to do. He stayed calm, stood his ground, and made space for the truth instead of another argument. If this story spoke to your heart, leave a 1 in the comments. And tell me this: if you had been standing inside Ridgeway Auto Care that night, would you have stepped forward? Or would you have stayed silent? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next story, where another ordinary moment will reveal the extraordinary strength hidden inside an everyday life.